Good afternoon and welcome to Dateline New Haven on WNHH-FM, New Haven's home for community radio. I'm Paul Bass, inviting you to look behind the headlines and the stories that make New Haven tick. A lot of people, when they talk about what makes New Haven tick, they think what makes us special is pizza or having a school where right-wing Supreme Court justices study before they destroy the country. But in fact, one thing you could say about New Haven and no other city in Connecticut is that we have public financing for mayoral races. We run clean funded races for mayor. We've been doing it since the first decade of this century. And today there's a new report out we're going to discuss about how it's all going. The Democracy Fund is the agency that administers our public financing program. And we have the administrator of the Democracy Fund, Ali Heimer, and two of the board members, Sarah Fika and Aaron Good, here to talk to us about this new report and do a check-in with the health of public financing and clean elections in New Haven. Good morning, everyone. And afternoon, and thanks so much for coming on air.
Thank you for having us.
Good to be here.
All right, we got Aaron Wade in there. I want to make sure we heard everybody's voice before we go on. So here's the title of the blockbuster. New Haven Democracy Fund Progress and Metrics. It's written by Zoe Becker, and it covers the last 12 years, 6 election cycles with public financing. How did Zoe Becker come to write this, and who is Zoe Becker?
So the board let's step back one step. Last year, the board was invited to go to Albuquerque, New Mexico for a conference of public finance administrators.
Really?
Nationally, yes. And one of the things that we talked about at that conference, which Aaron Good and I both attended, was metrics for success of public campaign finance programs. And considering that the Democracy Fund had been around for about 15 years, we felt that it was time to sort of look at the program and see what our metrics showed us. What successes had we had? What successes should we be aiming for? And, what are some of the areas where maybe we weren't being as effective as we had hoped or that we wanted to be. So Zoe was our data analyst. She's a senior at Bowdoin University out of Maine. She responded to a request for a summer position to do some data analysis, and as a result came up with this paper after doing analysis for about 3 months. I was paid through the Democracy Fund to do that work.
It was kind of fun to look through this report because having followed this issue, starting with the ethics scandals in City Hall in the 90s, and as a response to that, the way business was done in all cities, not just New Haven, where the person who is getting a no-bid contract from the city that's very controversial will also be the campaign finance chairperson who will raise large contracts from contributions to people who do business with the city. It didn't just happen in New Haven, but because it became a scandal in New Haven, our legislators decided to try to put together public finance, try to make it work, which is hard in the details. It's all good in concept. It's hard in our program. Maybe if one of you could just tell the basic rules. Because of Buckley versus Vallejo, a Supreme Court decision that said that giving money is free speech, you can't stop someone from giving a lot of money to a campaign, but you can put rules to give public money for people who agree to abide by the rules. We have a voluntary opt-in system. So if you opt in and say, I'm going to get money from the government to run my campaign, what do you have to agree to do?
So there's a couple of things that we ask you to do. The first is that we ask you to limit your contributions from individuals down from the state maximum, which is $1,000, to $445, so a little less than half. We ask you not to accept contributions from special interest groups, from political action committees, PACs, from other outside entities, contractors, businesses, to only accept contributions from individuals, and to make sure that you record every single contribution on your campaign filings. You don't lump them together into a small donations category. And so because we're asking for that limitation and we're asking you for maximum transparency into your records, in exchange we match the first $35 of every contribution from a registered New Haven voter, 2-to-1. And we also provide a grant after you achieve ballot access of $23,000.
Yeah, another thing that we require candidates is to participate in a debate.
Correct.
Which is really important. Aaron, tell me if you guys have noticed this, any of you. Is it your sense that it used to be if you ran for office, it was kind of understood you're going to debate? sort of a norm of life. Like you go, okay, I remember talking to some politicians tell me, okay, I know I have to do a debate. Do people, if they're not in the Democracy Fund, still feel they need to? Because I've been shocked sometimes when people ask us to hold a debate and the other people say, I don't need to. I'm not going to lose. So I don't want to like get up there and have to talk to people.
Yeah,
Have you noticed that either?
people
Have you noticed that trend?
Yeah, absolutely, and I think you have a few things going on there. One is people feel like they can get out their message in other ways, like through social
Much
media,
more effective than they used to, yeah.
or just posting on social media or doing a podcast or things like that. I mean, I think you see that in presidential race. I mean, you see it at all levels.
I mean,
of politics.
DeSantis from the beginning has said, even as governor, I don't really have to talk to anyone I don't want to talk to. I don't have to answer any questions I don't have to answer.
Yeah, you're just speaking to partisan media and in an echo chamber. I think another thing you see going on is, certain groups, like, for example, the League of Women Voters, which used to moderate a lot of debates and still does at the local level in Connecticut, for various reasons has come to be perceived as taking stands on issues or being partisan.
Because with their old definition on partisan is that you should let everybody be heard and you should have civil debate, which is now considered, I guess, a partisan position. Yeah.
Well, I mean, with respect to the league specifically, they are scrupulously nonpartisan, but they do take stands on certain issues in ways that are perceived.
They want people to be able to vote, and there's now one party that's come against that.
Well, they're like for gun control. So
okay.
if you want to perceive that as supporting one party, you can certainly see it through that lens. But I mean, the larger issue is that some of the sort of traditional gatekeepers or kind of groups that would moderate or set up these debates have been caught up in the kind of very polarized atmosphere that we have in society. And that leads to people rejecting the idea of a fair moderator and, okay, I'm not going to participate in these debates anymore.
Well, we're talking about public finance and clean elections New Haven, the people from the Democracy Fund and their new report, Democracy Fund Progress and Metrics, here on Dateline New Haven, WNHH FM. So here's some of your fine takeaways. As I understood the takeaways, it can come down to two words. It's working. People are participating in the system. Not everybody, but what strikes me as an incumbent who could raise a lot more money feels he needs to participate. In 2011, John DeStefano, who created the fund in part, did not participate because he felt he had a strong opponent, so he'd raise more money by being able to hit up contractors for more money. But we have incumbents participating, and you found out that people who participate raise 28% more in town donations than people who don't participate. So that means if you're running public, you could raise more money from people in New Haven than if you don't. Is that the conclusion, or is that not a cause and effect?
Well, so one of the things that we do is we reward candidates for raising money from registered New Haven voters. And so we incentivize them to talk to people locally.
So it looks them to, so that 28%, does that include the match, or is it just that they pay more attention to local people so they can get that match?
That's just the sheer number of individuals.
And how do you compare that? Is that the total number raised in town from used to be? Or is it more than the people who don't participate? What does 28% more mean?
Yeah, so I can take that. So what the study found, what the report found, is that for participating candidates, 90% of both the donations, the individual donations, and the total amount raised is coming from within New Haven.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like 90% of the total amount raised and 93% of the number of donations. Okay, and that's it. And what the 28% is comparing that to non-participating candidates, where you find it's just above half of the total amount raised for non-participating candidates is coming from New Haven. In other words, almost half of the amount of money raised by non-participating candidates is coming from the suburbs,
and the reason
from
we
Hartford.
Like that is that we want people from New Haven deciding who runs and how they run, having more influence than people who aren't from New Haven, that they're not just coming here to make a buck. Is that sort of the idea?
The specific goal when they created the Democracy Fund was to give New Haven residents more control over the election of their mayor.
Not let a person come from out of town and say, because I work for, let's say, a big national consulting firm, I can raise a lot of money and buy the office with the agenda that people gave me that money.
Yeah, most of the donations that are coming from outside of New Haven. Well, for number one, the study actually looks at this, and it shows that for non-participating candidates, 64% of the total amount raised is coming from donations larger than $445. So a lot of their money is not just coming from outside New Haven, but it's coming in very large chunks.
Right. And I think the participating candidates in the 12 years have raised over $5 million in campaign contributions under 445. So you're saying, Aaron, is that the other people, that the contributions are larger?
Yeah, and
They still have to be 1,000, right? But
A
then
thousand
can they
is the
get
limit.
PAC money, though, unlimited?
There are limitations that are set up by the state, but they can accept money from political action.
Is it still 1,000, or is it can it
I
get
believe
more?
it's 1,500 for a
1,500?
municipal race.
Okay. So why does that matter? Because some people would say nowadays 1,000 versus 45 is not such a big deal.
Well, it's the number of voices in the conversation, right? Like, so if you look at the report, over the past, 10, 15 years, the candidates who are participating and the candidates who are not participating seem to have raised about the same amount of money. But the difference is that for non-participating candidates, it came from 16,000 total contributions, right? But for participating candidates, there were 47,000 voices involved in that donation. So you're multiplying.
Although some of those people double, triple counted, right? If someone gave to,
I mean, some people do donate multiple times.
yeah. But still, your point is well taken. It's a lot more people.
But the same people who were going to donate multiple times to a participating candidate might donate multiple times to a non-participating candidate.
And it's a deeper level of civic engagement when people are making a small donation. I mean, we want everybody to vote, obviously, and that's an important aspect of civic engagement. But when somebody gives a donation of $10, $25, $50, they're deepening their engagement in the political process. So we see that, and other public financing programs across the country use that as a very important metric. The number of registered voters who are also getting engaged in the process as donors. So since we've adopted public financing in New Haven, we've been able to raise that percentage from less than 1% to like 3% of our registered voters are now donating in campaigns. And we see that as a sign of the Democracy Fund promoting more robust civic engagement.
I wanted to ask you about that. So in nonprofit media, they often say they want us to raise. They use a similar argument to yours, Aaron. In nonprofit media, they say they want us to raise a lot of small donations just to have people invested. So is the idea if you're giving $10 to $25, you're more invested, you're going to pay more attention? Because some people would say that it's not about money. Some people would say it's about voting and showing up to debates or talking to people or volunteering at campaigns. But your argument, similar to the media argument, is if someone shells out a small amount, they might not have a lot of money. That's showing they have more of a stake in an election.
Yeah, I mean, we see that as empowering them. And just to go back to what you said before about the takeaway being that this is working, I mean, I agree with that. But there are some conclusions in the report that show that there's more work that we need to do. The Democracy Fund has not solved the problem of political inequality in New Haven of certain
Well, we'll
more
get to that one
affluent
about
neighborhoods.
what neighborhoods, yeah.
Yeah, but I mean, the point is that none of these problems are easily solved. There's no magic bullet solution. There are some changes that we probably should make with our program to create an even deeper
Well, one
level
issue
of
is the
political
Buckley versus
engagement.
Vallejo, the fact that you can't require people to participate. How does one address that problem? How big a deal is that someone, although we found in this election, the candidate who did not participate, who brought in larger checks from out of town, ended up raising less money than the people who participated. I found that very interesting.
I mean, I think a lot of it has to do with public perception, right? When you have public buy-in into a program like this, then, the people basically tell somebody who's interested in running for office, if you want to be considered as a serious candidate, you should participate in the program. It's beneficial to you. You will most likely, and in almost every single instance, raise more money overall if you participate than if you don't. But also, we're going to view that as a measure of political literacy. Do you understand the program? Are you willing to do the things that are required of this program, of participation that, we value, like keeping really good records for your financial, expenditures and
fundraising,
right? And so as a result, it's now become more and more the default to be a participating
Right.
candidate than to not.
That is interesting. Yeah.
Well, I just said one of the other things that we require in addition to participating in debate is we require that candidates file electronically into the state's ECRIS database, which is a much more transparent uh, system for people who want to look at who's giving to who, not just in New Haven, but across the entire
To Allie's
state.
point, I've noticed that about the default. So I've talked to, off the record, I'm not going to name everyone, of course, or give clues, but, politicians say to me, well, if I participate, does that help me or hurt me? On the one hand, I'll get public money. On the other hand, I can't raise all this money I think I'm going to raise if from other people. How much does the public recession matter? How much do the people care, and who cares? Like, what kind of voters are going to care? Sarah, you've seen this question from both sides. You're on the board of Democracy Fund. You've worked on campaigns. How do you think that gets viewed inside campaigns? Is there a sense that it helps you more in the money you might give up by not getting a bigger check? You'll get more support from people who see that, and you might even raise more money in the end?
Yeah, from a branding and marketing perspective, I think that candidates that do choose to participate see that benefit. The fund has been around long enough that the types of people who participate in a mayoral election in a city that, let's be real, normally goes with one political party. So you have a lot of people who don't feel like they want to even bother showing up to vote or participate because they assume a Democrat is going to win no matter what. In a city like that, what is the motivation for an average citizen to care about the race? And I do think that buying into the Democracy Fund, candidates do make that decision. It's good marketing and branding. It's the people who choose to participate in primaries in New Haven do put a value on it.
Mm-hmm. So you think it's valid on both sides. So that's, in some ways, that's a non-metric evidence of success.
I think it's also an interesting tool that people use when they're fundraising.
Right. Come on, we want to make the Democracy Fund.
We want to make sure that we can get our 200 individuals from New Haven. We want to make sure we can raise our $5,000 and, get our match, get our grant, help us do this. And not even, you mentioned, trying to raise small dollar contributions from people for the radio station or for, the independent. And how much more successful are you when there's somebody willing to match those donations 2-to-1?
Right, which we have Newsmatch here.
Right. And so, there are tons of people who are like, well, I'll give you the maximum matched contribution because you'll get 2-to-1 and it makes my dollars more powerful.
And to Aaron's point about civic engagement, I saw in the report that in Hartford, fewer than 0.5% of the people donate to campaigns. Where in New Haven, as we said, it's more than 3%. 3% still isn't that big a number.
Well, there are other programs across the country that, have better return, better participation rates. Unfortunately, they have different formats for their public campaign financing.
Do they have more competitive elections? Like in New Haven, now we're going to move to 4-year, so more is going to be at stake.
Right.
But, the way it was kind of looked at by the people running for office is like, okay, every 2 years you're running. And a lot of years, you're not going to have serious opposition. But if New Haven's concerned about something, corruption in 99 and 2001, school reform in 2009, 11 about wanting some change with that, 2013 of changing the guard after 20 years. And then other years, there isn't as much reason to participate. But the other cities have more participation is because they're more competitive?
There's so many variables involved in voter turnout. We would love to have been able to show in this report that the Democracy Fund was leading to this inexorable rise in voter turnout in New Haven. But, as you suggested, there are just so many different things going on. There's corruption scandals.
And when the presidential
term
elections,
lanes.
we get some more number of people, they just care more about those elections, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. You have off years. You have all of these different variables. So there's just so much statistical noise is that we think that there is a positive correlation between public financing and voter turnout. It's just there's so much going on in the data that it's hard to make that case with.
There's also a lot going on at the national level.
Why do you think there's a correlation? What do you base that on?
Because people are literally buying in. Because there's when you have more conversations with more people.
No, I get the theory, but is there any evidence about numbers and how you pick which campaigns to compare them to? Like you can't compare 2013 to 2005. You can't compare 2019 to 2021,
Fair. I mean, there are some. So if you look at this, report that we put together, you will see that there are years where there are huge spikes, right? And that there are huge spikes for non-participating candidates versus participating candidates because of who was competing in those elections. And we don't really compare all of that weighted equally. But by tracking the changes over time, keeping in mind the different levels of competition in each of these races, we do see certain trends.
We're talking about trends with public financing, clean elections in New Haven with the folks in the Democracy Fund here on WNHH-FM's Dateline New Haven. Talking about participation, I'm also thinking of candidates. One of the goals of the Democracy Fund was to enable more people to run for office and be able to mount a serious campaign, even if they're rich or don't come from a wealthy network of national consultants. And what do you see that with, Sarah? Do you feel like, because I've kind of, with a non-scientific way, felt that Democracy Funds had a huge impact. As I look at Jeffrey Karikas in 2011, who mounted a serious campaign against entrenched incumbent and kind of sent a message. I mean, it had help from the Unite Here people, which wasn't financial. But, Liam Brennan did qualify in the Democracy Fund primary. What do you think, Sarah, about in terms of if we're enabling more people to run, which is an important goal?
Yeah, absolutely. As someone who lived in New Haven since the 90s and had personally a perception that there was no point in voting in the primary because I didn't have a voice or the Democratic choice was preordained in this Democratic town, I think that you have seen people wage pretty aggressive campaigns in the past couple of cycles, and they knew that they could do that because they would be able to raise a certain amount of funds.
And the idea is that even if you don't match them, you need a certain amount to run. Is there a sense of how much you need to run in New Haven for mayor to be a serious candidate? Does the Democracy Fund get you there? I like the way that you have to meet certain benchmarks, so it's not just everybody in the street can get it.
The benchmarks are great because they demonstrate at least a base amount of support. I mean, it's no small thing to get that many people to donate even $5 for your cause. That's a commitment.
In terms of enough money, Aaron or Allie, any sense of if this gives how much you need? How much do you need to win mayor in New Haven?
Yeah, I mean, there's been a lot of political science research on this, and I think the studies show, to be competitive, you need about $2.50 or maybe $3 per registered voter.
And how many registered voters do we have?
I think we have
74,000.
And then how many Democrats?
About half of that, a little more than half. A lot of folks in New Haven are unaffiliated.
Okay.
So, and that's to be competitive. I mean, you're never going to be able to.
So you need $100,000 in the primary.
150.
In the general. And how much do you get if you're running? How much do you generally get if you get running?
So from the Democracy Fund, you'll get a $23,000 grant for the primary, a $23,000 grant for the general election, but you also get matching funds. So for example, in this year's election, Mr. Brennan, who you mentioned, received $36,000 from us. Justin Elliker, who participated in both the general and the primary, received a total of $98,000. So,
and then how much did they get total? Were they able to get total while abiding by the limits, not just from the Democracy Fund?
So they're also able to raise up to $445,000.
Right. So how much did Brennan get total? Do you know?
But they don't raise that. I mean, they don't get up that high. Brennan raised over $100,000 on his own.
So he got what he needed. This didn't limit him from getting the $100,000 he needed.
Yeah,
certainly not.
He had enough to be competitive, and that's what we're trying to provide. We're not trying to provide an amount of money that's going to be equivalent to what a hypothetical self-funding candidate who's incredibly wealthy, a Linda McMahon type candidate. But you don't need that. I mean, it's like Dan Malloy.
Well, we saw that over and over 4 gubernatorial elections with Republicans who self-funded. Ned Lamont self-funded, but Dan Malloy beat Tom Foley, who self-funded.
Right. And
he was able to get enough money.
Exactly. I mean, some of these candidates were outspent 4 or 5 to 1 by like Linda McMahon, who spent $50 million, right?
But there's diminishing returns.
There's very rapidly diminishing returns. So what we're trying to provide is just the amount that you need to get your message out if you're a credible candidate. Okay, we're not trying to get you to compete with the self-funders that they're allowed to spend as much as they want according to the Supreme Court, but we just want you to have the resources.
And if you're a self-funder, that usually means you have no perspective on what you need to do and how to win anyway. But that's another story with the
one of the things that
candidates
is
for Republicans.
great about participating in the Democracy Fund is it really incentivizes you to talk to registered voters.
Which has to do with debates. So if not for Democracy Fund, all the people who run do not have to go to a debate. So if you participate, you have to show up to one Democracy Fund debate to which you have some kind of rule by who gets to participate, which is a little tricky because sometimes there are people who maybe aren't going to really have a serious campaign, but might have something to say.
Are you thinking of a particular recent debate?
I'm actually
Paul?
no. I'm actually thinking of 2013 in one debate where two people who were long shots were nice people. You know, they sometimes got a little crazy, and there were 2 out of 4. It wasn't democracy; it was in the primaries, and people kind of felt like I wanted to hear more from the people who were going to maybe win. But then you can argue sometimes that the long shots contribute so much. Like Wally Grigo ran for mayor in 1991, I think, or 93. And he really didn't have a good chance, but he had a lot of energy. But he raised some issues that changed, and then Kevin Skeeston general election changed how the incumbent governed because of the debates. He actually got mileage saying that we should put a mall in Long Wharf rather than downtown, which we then disagreed with later. But that's what the mayor then he was running against took that. Or Kevin Skees said we should sell our liens to our to the tax liens so that we can fund some big projects like Jersey City did. And then the mayor did that, and that got him in trouble too. So maybe democracy's not so good.
My inclination is to err on the side of including the quote unquote fringe candidates. I mean, the problem is like at least nationally, the threshold used for inclusion usually is tied to polling, and we just don't have access to that in New Haven.
But you say you have to make the ballot, which is a fair, right? You have to make the ballot to participate.
Yeah, I mean, it requires you to collect a certain number of signatures to have shown that you have, boots on the ground, done some footwork. There is a level of participation that should be required in order to not just have the stage be open up to anybody.
Then Aaron cut him short before. He's just going to want to wait to the positive findings, then get to the challenges. He talked about the challenge of how you distribute participation. 42% of the contributions have come from East Rock and Westville. Those are 2 neighbors, the big neighborhoods, but they're not 42% of the wards of the city. I think often if you throw in the East Shore, wards 18, 17, 18, a lot, that's also where a lot of the votes come from. I mean, basically Justin Eliger's the mayor of East Rock and Westville. What did you find out? Is the fact that Aaron pointed out that means there's work left to be done, that so much of the money's coming from 2 neighborhoods. If so much of the participation's coming from those 2 neighborhoods, are you sort of in a catch-22 there?
Well, as I said before, I mean, there's a lot more work that needs to be done, and there's no magic bullet solution. There's no panacea to the political inequality here. That said, 42% coming from 2. I think it's actually 3. It's East Rock, Prospect Hill, and Westville. It's still better to have those donations coming from New Haven residents rather than from developers and city contractors who live in.
And there's a lot more wealth in those
Simsbury
neighborhoods too.
Well, that's why part of the report was to do an analysis of the poverty rate in conjunction with these donors. It also matters, where the candidates are coming from. You'll see a big spike in the East Shore contributions in 2021 because John Carlson was a participating member, and that's where he hails from. You'll also see,
No, he hails from City Point.
City Point, but he gets a lot of his support from
Republicans.
that area.
There's still Republicans in the East Shore.
Yes, and then you'll also see in 2013 that there were more than usual contributions coming from Beaver Hills. Because you had some individuals that were coming from there. This past time around, there were more contributions that came from Beaver Hills because Shafika Dubusser lives, on Winthrop.
So, Aaron, is that something you say is more work to be done, or is it just that the political system has more work to be done, and you guys are just in place so that people, if someone's running from Beaver Hills or the East Shore, they'll be involved?
Well, we want to level the playing field even more, and if you look at how different programs are structured across the country, and you look at some of these cities like Seattle and now Oakland that are using these vouchers, or what they call democracy dollars. That's what they were called when it was first put on the ballot in Seattle. They were kind of the pioneer in this. And I think they have been able to reduce this effect where you see this, negative correlation between the neighborhood.
How do democracy dollars work?
So with the democracy dollars Allie can take a crack on this as well, because she was just at the public financing conference, and so I'm sure there's more fresh in her mind. But the way that it's structured in Seattle is they give every voter 4 $25 vouchers. Right, they have no cash value, but you can distribute that to one candidate that you want, or you can give them to different candidates.
You said $250.
$25.
So it's $100.
But so even if you have no resources, you're completely broke. You're at the bottom of the socioeconomic pyramid. You're still a mid-level donor now.
Cheat out there to do food stamps. Could someone buy them for you if you're a junkie and half on the dollar, so you can buy drugs and then somehow cash that in?
That you would even think about that, Paul.
Because
is a little
that's been
frightening,
happening
but-
in New Haven with no, I've been noticing some stories lately I was looking into where people do that with the food stamps. It's kind of
Yeah, I don't know. I haven't seen any research about what the street value of these vouchers in Seattle, but I don't think that's been a problem. But what they have found in Seattle is, this is getting your donor rate up to like 10%, 8 to 10% of your registered voters. So it's really leveling the playing field and empowering those small donors. So I think if we had the resources to do that in New Haven, I think that would start to chip away at some of these
Well, that's a
lingering
great
inequalities.
idea. Yeah. Would you like us to do that?
Yeah. And speaking of resources, you know that people can make donations to the Democracy Fund.
Oh, yeah. Tell me about that.
Yeah. So, Allie, will you?
Yeah, sure. So we have one primary funding mechanism, which is through a allocation through the mayor's office and the board of alders. But we take income in other ways as well, and one of them is direct contributions to the fund. And it is something that we're trying to explore in the future so that it's not just tax dollars that are going into funding our local elections, but that we're, using some of the same principles as what we're espousing, and that's trying to get small dollar contributions from people in the community who believe in the program.
So maybe there's a millionaire out there who wants to finance Aaron's dream of democracy dollars and get that going. We can demonstrate it for one cycle and get some data to show that it works. And
it's a great idea.
Yeah.
So now another job you have on Democracy Fund is to make sure people follow the rules. And we had a case this time where one of the candidates participating in the fund very blatantly broke the rules. So you have a rule, and I'm just going to read it. It says that you may not, if you get money from Democracy Fund, the money you spend, quote, shall not include, quote, expenditures to support or oppose any ballot measure. So there was a candidate got your money who put out a flyer that all it did over and over again was support a ballot measure. It didn't say vote for him for mayor. It didn't say, here's a whole list of things I stand for in my platform, because of course you could do a platform. All it said was vote for this ballot measure. So it wasn't a gray matter, even though he said it was. You were faced with a case with slam dunk. Someone broke your rules. You gave them money. The rules were there. They didn't do it. But then you voted 5-1 to say no biggie. You didn't do a violation. Why? You guys are on the board. Why did you guys vote that?
because it wasn't a slam dunk. And
so if it says you should not spend money, quote, on expenditures to support or oppose any ballot measure, and the money was spent only over and over again on a flyer that says support this ballot measure, what's the gray area?
So again, it wasn't a slam dunk. And, we have a board that's made up of Democrats, real Republicans, because I know there's been some questions about whether our Republicans are real. And I can assure you from my personal conversations with my fellow board members, they are real. So there was a robust discussion, and it wasn't a slam dunk. And there were
we don't know what the discussion was because you guys did it in private.
In our second meeting, all of the issues were laid out. I think we went extensively over all of the legal and constitutional issues that were involved here, and all of the contextual
the second time you did,
issues. So I think everything was out in public in the second meeting, and we didn't get a lot of public participation in that meeting, but I would urge people to go and look at the recording.
So what was the gray matter? Because I'm still trying to figure it out, because if this isn't a slam dunk, how can anything ever be a slam dunk?
Can I just say one thing? That when you're dealing with potentially fining a political actor for the content of their political speech, that's a very, very, very serious issue that raises all kinds of First Amendment issues, constitutional questions. So there's really no such thing as a slam dunk.
So what you're saying here is that maybe you can't have the rule. He totally violated the rule, but you're saying it might not be constitutional for you to put any rules.
Well, that for me, that was a big issue that informed my decision. Is I had some grave questions about some currently pending state constitutional cases, Markley v. SEC.
So you're
about
saying
the validity of.
So you're saying, therefore, if we give money, you really can't stop them from saying anything.
I don't think that's the case. And I do.
Well, but isn't that what Aaron just said?
It's not that you can't stop them from saying anything. I mean, some regulation obviously is always valid, but you have to give very, very wide latitude, right? And there are specific legal tests that are set up in cases like FEC versus Wisconsin Right to Life, Supreme Court case from 2007, basically saying, you have to give such wide latitude that if anybody could possibly interpret this as being an issue advertisement versus a candidate advertisement, or a candidate advertisement versus an issue advertisement, if anybody could possibly plausibly interpret it that way, you have to give the benefit of the doubt to the candidate, because this is protected speech, and we have to not interfere with that. Right?
So is there a need now to let people who donate to the Democracy Fund know that despite what we've told you for 15 years, if you give money to this candidate, they might not spend it to promote their candidacy. They might spend it to promote a ballot measure you don't agree with.
Well, I think there were some other issues too, and Sarah and Allie can talk about those. I mean, there's a whole context about the candidate thinking that he was following
That's
the
my
advice
dog ate the homework.
he.
I mean, who cares if he thought that?
Well, there is an issue. I mean, we're generally not looking at intent. These are civil infractions, and intent is not really part of it. But there is a larger context, and when you're talking about the candidate, reaching out proactively to get to get advice.
Yeah,
I mean,
but
that
then
did,
he
I
said
think,
someone
inform.
reached out who heard something back. So he played telephone. He didn't have enough intellectual curiosity to understand it.
Well,
Is
you
that
may
it?
not buy it, Paul, but
I
there
sure
were
as hell don't buy
Democrats,
it.
independents, and Republicans on our board who did buy that explanation. So I think that's important for the
So if
public
I
to
go
know
and
as
rob
well.
a store because I asked someone to ask the cops, is it okay if I rob on Mondays rather than Wednesdays? And the guy, I misunderstood what my friend told me.
But see, that's the thing.
My intent was okay, so I can go rob the store on Wednesday.
Well, he's not your friend. You were paying him for the advice.
So he should maybe pay some other people. It's not your problem.
So two things I want to clear up. One is that Allie is our administrator, so she
Yeah, she
doesn't
didn't-
get
yeah.
to vote. It's only those of us on the board that get to vote, so people should know that, first of all. And secondly, there's way more nuance to it than that, because we do have part of the rule where people can talk about their platform. And so those of us on the board found ourselves in a position where we saw a candidate who did their due diligence to try to ask repeatedly and ask multiple different times, multiple texts, multiple different people, are you sure I'm doing this correctly? And they were advised that they were. And there is the nuance that candidates are allowed to talk about their platform. And so we as a board, again, Republicans, independents, and Democrats from across the spectrum did not feel like this was a slam dunk. And
So
that's
then
why
are you going
there
to keep
was-
this rule? Because this rule now says something specific. And you're basically telling me that you can't enforce this rule. So why is this rule still there?
Well, so there's two different things. The first is it possible that what he was trying to put out in that mailer was a position piece on a topic, right? They don't necessarily have to have their entire position on a piece. You can say, I'm pro this, I'm pro that. There were other things that were on the ballot that, he may, or some other candidate may have felt needed their own mailer. And he did ask for, people to vote for him as a candidate.
No,
His
but-
picture
but
was on
separate
there.
from
His
him.
logo was
But
on
separate
there.
from him, is
And
it-
then on the top of it, he also did say, people ask me what my opinion is. This is my opinion.
the big slogan was vote this. Vote this. Over again, vote this. But in
So
any case,
if you were on the board, you would have voted differently.
no, but why
You
is this
know?
rule still here if
Well, so there are a lot of
Could you-
rules in that
can
document
ever
because that
this-
document hasn't been
But
updated
can
since
this ever be
2009.
broken? So in the
If-
future, when I give money in Democracy Fund, should I understand that? And it's not a big deal. I think it might be okay to put out that flyer personally. But should I know from now on that this is not a rule that can ever be enforced so a candidate really can put out that piece?
Well, we've been trying to make some changes to the ordinance for about 2 years now. Unfortunately, we have not had the opportunity to start that process and getting into the nitty gritty with the legislation committee of the Board of Alders. But changing that language to be a little bit more specific to avoid this kind of issue in the future, I think that is something that we'll be looking at.
And it's a very tiny issue. I know I'm nitpicking here.
Well, there are other issues in that ordinance that
Yeah.
haven't been resolved because it hasn't been changed since 2009.
What else would you like to see changed?
I would like to close that exploratory loophole. I would like.
What is that loophole?
where you can set up an exploratory campaign, spend all of the money from your account, and then start up as a Democracy Fund candidate with $0 in your coffer, having spent however much you raised in exploratory, and still be considered a good, clean participating candidate. There are other things that are in that ordinance that have now been deemed unconstitutional. There was a provision originally in the document that if somebody had spent more than the maximum total allowed for a candidate, that candidates could come back and request more dollars, or we could raise the limits for their contributions. That has been deemed unconstitutional. You can't do that. So there's there are things in that legislation that aren't accurate anymore. We also want to reset the contribution amounts. We think that they've been adjusted for inflation. They've been adjusted for inflation multiple times, and 445 might be a little bit too much. Maybe we should go back down to 400 like it was a couple years ago, and then start from there. Create a new benchmark so that it is again, a Democracy Fund pledge where they would promise to do all of the financial filing and then basically get a good government sticker.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah, and then but whether or not we want people to have grant money to run for alder is a concept that I don't think many people would support. But we do want to include other citywide offices. Board of Education should potentially be included. Registrar of Voters, City Clerk. Those might all be things that people would be interested in, and we might get more diverse candidates running for those offices if there was a program like this.
Well, even though I gave you such a hard time for rolling over for Justin Elker, I think you guys did a great job, as this report shows, that you're really getting a lot more people involved. We're the only one in the state. You were just in Kansas City talking about this. Tell me about that.
Yeah, so I went to a conference on governmental ethics and law, and was invited to be on a panel with one of the program managers from Seattle, Maine's public finance program, and Arizona's public campaign finance program, as well as the city of Albuquerque. And so we were talking about different program models, and I was representing New Haven's because we're the only hybrid system in the country. So by that I mean we provide matching funds and we also provide a grant. Many programs either do a single grant or they do matching funds. Some, like Seattle, do a voucher program. And so we were representing our model, and there were other people, across the country who thought that model was really great because it means that you don't necessarily have to give out a ton of money in matching funds. New York City, for example, gives out an 8-to-1 match for your contributions. Wow. And then there are some programs that give out, $50,000 to $100,000 in grants. And that, is also incredibly expensive. But, a hybrid program allows you to not give out as much money necessarily, but have the same or more impact because you're asking for people to talk to many people and you're asking them to report cleanly.
And what about like in Connecticut? Any hope now? You think with the scandal in Bridgeport, people or anyone calling you up and saying, "Hey, you guys did a good job a generation ago when there were questions about ethics in New Haven. You did this first in the state, really successful Democracy Fund." Anyone calling you say, "Help us set it up there"?
There have certainly been in the past, and people in Bridgeport have given us a call in past years.
Oh yeah,
yeah.
This year they're a little busy, or
seems like they might be a little busy.
I'd heard in the past that Joe Gannon was actually interested.
I know. I heard that too. Yeah.
But we're hoping at some point to host in New Haven a conference of public financing administrators to kind of get out the publicity, get out the word about this to other cities in Connecticut, and let them know that we're all about not just progressive civic experimentation, but also about pizza and lots of other great things.
And the peanut, because I would argue that the Democracy Fund and the peanut roundabout are the two most exciting, distinctive things that make me proud to be a New Havener.
Amen.
So keep up the good work. Spread the word. And how should people get involved?
We do have an open board member position for a registered Democrat, Independent, or Republican, which is very, very rare. Information is on the city website, and we have our monthly board meeting tomorrow night. You can attend in person at City Hall or via Zoom.
Where on the website will we find that info?
Go to City of New Haven, so newhavenct.gov, and then Democracy Fund is its own link.
All right. Well, keep up the good work, folks. Thanks to Allie Heimer, Sarah Fika, and Aaron Good at the Democracy Fund. And the new report you can read, we're going to put it in the Independent this week. You can read it there. I think it was a good read. New Haven Democracy Fund Progress and Metrics. Thanks to Harry Drost for working the controls. We're going to take it out with the Afro-Semitic Experience performing I Wish I Knew. How It Would Feel to Be Free, from the group CD, A Plea for Peace. This is Paul Bass inviting you to fly free with us all day and all night long at WNHH, New Haven's home for community radio.